Another New York Jets training camp practice is in the books. The offense did still have some struggles. They looked better, a lot to break down. My guest is Brandyn Pokrass of Jet X Factor. We were both at New York Jets training camp practice today, so we will both be sharing an eyewitness breakdown of today's practice. Let's roll.
Jets, Jets, let's go.
Jets wide receiver Wesley Walker. Wesley, how you doing today? ESPN writer Mr. Rich Cimini, Jets reporter for The Athletic, Mr. Zach Rosenblatt, Hall of Famer and Jets legend Mr. Marty Lyons.
Your host, Connor Law.
Welcome in everyone. We are here. It is a Tuesday edition of NY Flight Jets Talk. Another New York Jets training camp practice is in the books. And who else do I have on today to break down today's practice other than Brandyn Pokrass of Jets X Factor? Brandyn, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Connor. Thank you for having me on once again. Very excited to talk about the second padded practice for the New York Jets.
Second padded practice, you're right, and you're one of very few people who were lucky enough to attend both padded practices yesterday and today, but you ready to dig right into it?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, so, I'm just, news that not related to practice at all, just something a little quick hit today is the Jets released fullback Nick Bawden to side tight end Anthony Frisker, however you say his name. He's played with the Titans. He only appeared in 2 regular games last year. We've seen the Jets do this with Bawden before. They've kind of, done that release and then bring him back. What do you really make of this move?
I make of it in the sense that I think Frisker fits more of that blocking mold.
Yeah.
So maybe the Jets might be thinking, obviously, early on in the preseason, they could always bring Bawden back. Could just be some roster maneuvering. Maybe they want to try to use Rucker in more of that type of role, and the way their offense is looking, they don't necessarily need that fullback option. And if they do want to use it, maybe now it's a blend of Rucker and Frisker taking up that role, or Rucker and Yeboah. So I think that's just something to keep an eye on in terms of scheme, where maybe they don't want necessarily that traditional fullback, but more of an H-back type player where, they're not just giving you blocking, but they're also running routes and lining up as your additional tight end.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Frisker originally started his career with the Jets, actually, as a UDFA out of Harvard. He has 115 catches for 1,207 yards and 5 touchdowns so far in his NFL career. Other than Jets, he's played with the Titans, Falcons, and Lions, I believe it is. So, I completely agree with what you said. I think I still think there's a chance that they bring Bawden back. I mean, like I said, we've seen this before, whether it was most recently this past December when they had to cut Bawden to make room for Rodgers on the 53-man, and then they ended up signing Bawden back to the practice squad. Not a major move, just something that, came up tonight that I definitely wanted to share with everyone watching. But in terms of, the practice today, like you said, you noted in your post-practice thoughts, the offense you thought did look better. What are some things you noticed that you think the team could definitely improve on, though?
I think just starts with communication, right? It seemed like this is your second padded practice. You're still installing different things. You're still getting your feet underneath you with the offense, whereas the defense, they usually have that leg up right at the beginning. Like communication with motion, communication with different routes. There were more than a few times where Aaron Rodgers thought Garrett Wilson was doing one thing, Wilson did another. Other times Rodgers threw the pass behind Wilson when Wilson was open. Just those small little things, and that's not even getting into, the Joe Tippmann aspect of it all with the snaps, an issue that extended beyond just the first unit today. It's not anything I'm overtly concerned about. It's something where it feels like the more reps they get, the more comfortability they get, the better it's going to look. And you got to remember, too, the Jets defense is very talented. And I think the biggest thing from these practices that I've taken out of, or at least in my top 3, the Jets defensive depth looks really good. Whether it is on the defensive line, it looks like they're getting the most out of those players. It looks like at the linebacker position, Jamie Sherwood looks much faster, much more decisive in how he's playing the position. Even Sam Aguavon, he looks very fast downhill when he's been in the game, in the reps. And then you look at the secondary, Jarek Bernard Converse, JBC, he's had some really good reps. He's lost a few, but that happens. He also has had some really good reps. Quantez Stiggers, the talk of OTAs, he's completely shut down wide receivers at times. So when you're dealing with this type of overall defensive unit, you're going to have struggles as an offense in general. But add in the fact that the comfortability aspect just isn't there yet. And this is the things you have happen. You have the misfires, the missed snaps, the false start, like all the different miscues, and a lot of them being mental. But I think as you see time go on, whether it is from today to Saturday at the end of the week, or today until next week when you have the joint practice with the Washington Commanders, I think you're going to see a lot of progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And that kind of goes back to the whole thing when Robert Saleh was asked earlier today in a press conference, what are his plans for Rodgers in the preseason? He said, they spoke, and if he was, I'm not direct quoting anything, but kind of generally what he was saying is, definitely he's not going to play in the first two, but if we haven't really looked at that, the third game is the possibility to see if he would play. We haven't really dug too deep into that game. In terms of in terms of Rodgers playing in the just preseason in general, really, like you said, the joint practices are definitely going to be something to watch. And offense, like you said, made some very good points there. But staying on the offensive side of the ball, name that still has considered, he's kind of flown under the radar as of late, just given the fact how many receivers there are in this room. Tyler Harrell, I watched him today. He looked great. How do you look at a guy like Harrell and evaluate him and like, okay, he has his talent, but then like the wide receiver room is so packed. Like how is he going to be able to showcase this talent?
I think it goes to the point, and that's something that I've talked about with others, and it's one of the main things I'm looking at. The depth is just a lot different this year. And it's not in the sense of, I think, whoever makes the roster is going to be to upper tier NFL producer, but it just seems like in terms of the guys that could step up, the Jets are a little bit deeper at certain positions. Running back, a position that the Jets haven't had that roster depth at. Braylon Allen looks great. I really like what I've seen from Isaiah Davis. Xavier Valde looked really good running the football today. And Tariq Coleman has shown some nice pass catching prowess. Receiver, as you mentioned, we all know what Garrett Wilson is, right? He's open on almost every play. He's running great routes. Yeah, there's the miscommunication aspect, but once that all gets worked out, in my opinion, you're dealing with a top 10 wide receiver in football. Mike Williams, I'm interested to see how quick he acclimates once he gets back onto the field, but you know what he can do. It's when you get past those two guys that things get a bit interesting, because Xavier Gibson for OTAs was that third guy. It was him and Alan Lazard. Gibson gets hurt. And the thing with football, more than almost any other sport, is that there's a next man up mentality. And that has really opened what this Jets wide receiver battle, at least at the depth spots, I'd say with receivers 4 to 6, looks like. You have Jason Brownlee, who on the one hand has made some great leaping catches, but he's also struggled to get separation a lot of times. A lot of times he's having to make these contested catch type plays because he's not beating Stiggers or JBC off the ball, and they're running with him stride for stride. You have Alan Lazard, who he's had his ups where he's making these contested catches over the middle of the field. He's had his red zone plays for the touchdowns, but he's also had his miscues. He's had his drops. He's had these plays that would have cost the Jets offense yards. And then beyond them, Malik Taylor, he's had a few miscues here and there, but overall, I'd say he's been really good. He's made a lot of contested catches. He had probably the best offensive play of the day on an absolute beauty of a deep ball from Tyrod Taylor. And then you get to Harrell. I think Harrell, in my opinion, has been one of the most explosive wide receivers the Jets have had.
Mhm.
If you look at the way he runs his routes, he's getting down the field fast. He's getting that immediate step on the cornerback. And, Stiggers shut him down on a fade route with some nice press coverage. But when Harrell's able to get going speed-wise, he's beating people down the field. There were at least 2 times today that I noted where a better pass was probably a very long touchdown, or at least a very long game. The problem was those passes were behind him because he got past the defense so fast. When the ball was behind him, he had to adjust, and the cornerback was able to recover. That's not even throwing in a guy like Lance McCutcheon, Marcus Riley, who I think had been below those guys, but McCutcheon has gotten involved. It all goes to say that you got to keep an eye on it because it's one of the more unique positions on the Jets in the sense of if that depth isn't right, they will probably look to make that trade, make an upgrade there. What these guys do in the preseason will really set the tone of, is this a position the Jets are comfortable with for the majority of 2024? Or is this a position that, let's say the Jets start off, 6-2 or 5-3, 7-1, and they get to a point where they're like, hey, we need to upgrade this position. So
Yeah.
It's great to have the depth, but I'm really personally interested in how that depth shapes up in terms of what certain guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's I completely agree. This receiver room kind of reminds me, a little bit. I'm not going to say like these receivers are not good receivers. Don't get me wrong. Mike Williams is very talented wide receiver. Can he stay healthy? Question mark. I look at this receiver room. I think there's a lot of quantity, not a ton of quality. I'm not that doesn't go to say anything. I'm not bashing any receivers. I think a lot of them are very talented, but I think there are a ton of guys. Like I think that whole, Tyler Harrell, like you mentioned, has been very explosive. But that Lance McCutcheon, that El Zayat boot, that group of receivers, they're all kind of in that similar boat, fighting for a job there. So yeah, I completely agree in that you mentioned Alan Lazard, and he's obviously a part of this receiver room. And Aaron Rodgers coming back, there's high expectations for him. When Brant Boyer spoke to the media earlier today, he kind of mentioned how Lazard's been taking some snaps on special teams. He said he's had a great attitude. He's kind of willing to do whatever it takes, really, to kind of make that next step. What do you think this really means, like in terms of taking special team steps? What do you think this means for Lazard and boosting his confidence going into the 2024?
I think when it comes to Alan Lazard, and this goes to the point you just brought up, so much of the Jets wide receiver room is unproven.
Yes, that's the word.
Gibson, Brownlee, Harrell, McCutcheon. That's 4 of the guys competing for roster spots are technically all unproven entities. Alan Lazard is a proven entity, but he had a really bad season. He checked out. He really did not do much to put him in the good graces of the Jets coaching staff. Until Malachi Corley's up to speed, and Corley, I personally think, had one of his better days. I think that he is truly taking step by step every day to eventually be that number 3 guy for the Jets. And I think he's going to be on the field right away. But Lazard has to play a role. He's going to play a role. I think that's why you see Rodgers targeting him so much. He's trying to boost his confidence so much because Rodgers knows that at least in a situational aspect, and that's personally what I want him in, at least in a situational aspect, the Jets are going to need Alan Lazard. They're going to need him, like you saw today, make that catch over the middle of the field to move the chains. They're going to need him in the red zone to make a play, whether it's in the end zone or to get them very close to the end zone. You can't have the Alan Lazard that's dropping passes, that's tipping balls into the cornerback's hands. So I think that by virtue of him being on the special teams, you're getting a locked-in Alan Lazard, or at least a more locked-in Alan Lazard. And maybe it's not the fact that, oh, hey, Alan Lazard's going to play special teams. It's more of a mindset thing. It's more of a, hey, this guy's actually ready to roll this season, and he understands that the Jets are going to need him, and he's getting himself in a position to ensure that he can contribute with those opportunities.
Yeah, I know. We were both at practice today, and the first play, really main first play, was Lazard that drop, and fans started booing him. I don't know if you noticed that, but fans started booing him, and then as practice went on, he corralled that nice ball, and then got huge hit by Chuck Clark that left him shaken up. He had
Big
to come
hit,
out.
very big
Yeah,
hit.
yeah, especially for like the second. I'm surprised that didn't spark a fight on the offense. I mean, that's a huge hit for the second day of Pat. I mean, that was crazy. But yeah, I completely agree there in terms of Lazard. Just like you said, trying to boost his confidence, show him that okay, you're still this very talented football player. I believe that's where the Jets are really trying to get here. But staying on the offensive side of the ball, the offensive line was one of the Jets' biggest struggles last year, finishing in the 30s, high 20s, low 30s. Something of that nature. And you look, they added 3 starters on the offensive line this year: John Simpson, Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith. Morgan Moses and Elijah Vera Tucker have been sidelined for the start of training camp. How important do you think it is that you get this unit playing together immediately? Especially, you've noticed these high snaps from Tippmann. The chemistry between Rodgers and the current offensive line is kind of shaky right now. How important do you think it is for Rodgers that he is out there practicing with his front 5?
I think it's very important. And I think it's very important because of the fact that Rodgers is a quarterback that relies so much on what he sees at the line. He's not someone that, let's face it, he's not a younger quarterback that's so reliant on the play calling and the scheme of the offense. To an extent, Aaron Rodgers is the scheme. He's making the hand signs. He's motioning to his receivers. He's sending the people in motion. He's reading the defense and changing what he likes and what he doesn't like. Because of that fact, you need the offensive line to all understand what Rodgers is trying to do. If you have just, okay, this piece has practiced the entire summer, but this guy has only practiced for a week, you're going to have that disconnect, and it's not going to let the Jets start as fast as they want to. And I think that's the other part of it, right? They play San Francisco week 1, one of the best teams in the entire National Football League, and probably my personal favorite to win the NFC this season. You can't come out and be, oh, our right guard or our right tackle isn't up to speed, so now we're that much further behind the 8 ball. You need to have as many reps, as many things done as possible in semi-live action and joint practices and maybe a drive even in the preseason. And look, things might still not always work all the time. You might have your issues when you get to the regular season. There still might even be some communication issues. But by starting as early as possible, and I think you're going to start to see that end of this week, beginning of next week, as you head into joint practice, as long as you get a semi-long runway to have this unit mesh together, you're going to eliminate so many of the problems that, let's face it, you've seen these past 2 days. You've seen the snapping issues. You've seen some of the miscommunication issues from the offense. That's a byproduct of learning so much right off the bat. And now you're going to have time to mesh and mesh and mesh together and get the offense to the best possible form it can be for week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just so important that you mentioned I completely agree. We still have a ton of time, but as soon as possible, like the second Morgan Moses and AVT are fully healthy, fully ready to go. I mean, I just want them to go right out there. I want to see how Rodgers, in terms of communication, chemistry, I think that's very important to build with your starting offensive line. Staying on the offensive side of the ball, Joe Tippmann has had some trouble snapping the ball so far. He had at least one I counted today that Aaron Rodgers kind of had to bobble and then throw out of bounds. And he had a good amount of them yesterday out of the shotgun formation. What do you think we should be concerned about this? Because when Nate Hackett spoke at his media during his media availability today, he didn't really seem to be concerned about this problem. I mean, I personally think this is just a little wave of something that he kind of just works through.
I mean, he had a bit of this issue last season. Like during some of the games when he was playing center, there were some higher snaps. I think a part of it is he's trying to work too fast.
Mm,
The reason you would misfire high, and you can relate this to other positions in football. You could relate to this in a baseball sense. You could relate to this in a basketball sense. When you're trying to think so much, your fundamentals sometimes go out the window. Take a baseball player, for example. When you're
mm,
trying to focus so hard on, let's say, a coach told you that your swing needs to be a bit more flat. Sometimes when you're focusing so hard on that one specific part of a swing, everything else with the swing gets out of whack. And what do you have to do? Get back to a point where you're just playing. Sometimes in basketball, when you're thinking about a certain play or a certain thing that you need to do on the offensive defensive side of the ball, you might completely lose focus on that jump shot form. And now you might be missing shots you've been making the entire time. I think it's just a young player trying so hard to pick up everything and learn a scheme to the point where he can be the best possible center for his future Hall of Fame quarterback. But sometimes you just lose focus of the little things. And Tippmann has the talent to rectify this issue and get it back to a level where, you're just getting the normal snaps. But even, and this is the thing I will say, and I'll preface this obviously with what I just said, that I think it will be figured out. I don't necessarily think it's the end of the world if it doesn't get figured out, because Tippmann looked great at guard. He has the talent to move in through different positions on the interior. If you, for example, lose confidence in Tippmann being your center, a worst case scenario, you slide him over to where John Simpson is. So now
and
you
you
have,
pick center.
I'll get to that in a second. But it's probably Tippmann and AVT. Then you have Moses, Tyron Smith, Simpson, and Fashanu on the bench. Then I'd probably reach out to Connor McGovern for the season and be like, hey,
Yeah.
come back and start. And then you have Tippmann as your quote unquote backup now if something happens to McGovern. Look, is that the best option? Is that the best thing for this team? No. But it's not the end of the world if the center avenue doesn't work for Tippmann, even though I truly think it does.
Actually, I think that's actually a pretty good combo. You move Simpson over to the bench, because you look at the Jets starting offensive line. It's definitely a lot better than we felt kind of going into last season. But John Simpson played for a very cheap amount of money last season. Kind of, that was he played all 17 games, and that's a great thing. 'Cause that's what the Jets are really looking for on this unit is health. So that's a huge factor. But he when I think of a Super Bowl winning offensive line, I don't think of John Simpson as a starting guard. I think of him as kind of a bench rotational type piece. So like you said, and then McGovern, you can bring him back for cheaper. And Tippmann guard is where Tippmann, has the majority of his experience playing at guard. So you move him back to his primary position, put McGovern at center, and McGovern has looked fine in his whole tenure with the Jets. Every year he's played, he's looked fine. So I really really like that plan. But Brandyn, really appreciate you joining me. You got any final thoughts?
Yeah, so I know a lot of people might look at these past 2 days and be like, "Oh, hey, the offense, the offense, the offense. Should we be worried?" The two things I'll say are, number one, remember that the Jets have one of the better defenses in the National Football League.
Correct.
That hasn't changed. They haven't lost the core of what makes them great. They have a swarming defensive line, and they have a secondary that can shut down almost anyone. We're seeing that very, very often in these practices. And Aaron Rodgers has even beat some lockdown coverage that a lot of, let's face it, quarterbacks won't be able to beat in a real game. Number two, it is the second day of padded practices. I'm going to hammer this home. Things will get better. These players are learning. They are getting acclimated to each other. Full contact practice, Connor, you can speak to this too. It is a lot different than practicing in shorts and t-shirt. The drills are different. The tempo is different. And the way you have to apply the football knowledge and scheme is a lot different. If we reach a point where the Jets offense still looks like this by next week, yes, it was probably time to start being a little concerned about things that are happening with the offense. But There's a lot of time left until the regular season. Take a page out of the Aaron Rodgers playbook, relax, enjoy the ride, and just be happy that football is basically back.
Brandon, really appreciate you joining me. Everyone, thank you guys for watching. And as always, JTS, Jets, Jets, Jets.